Ask anybody in the industry, and they'll probably disagree with me. But I think there's really two camps. Stuff that moves, and stuff that doesn't. I did event lighting. Epileptic roving beams over a fog machine. Mechanized glowing set pieces, rainbow colors. I did the fun stuff, the dynamic stuff. The rest is piddly shit. Trying to hawk $80 residential floodlights or convince an office building your 6-inch recessed cans are slightly different and more better than someone else's identical cans that nobody is ever going to notice anyway. I'm not big-time famous or anything. I had a decent reputation, and it's a small field, so I got crew jobs that were beneath me on all-star tours, or I got to be the big fish in the small pond being the lighting designer for off-Broadway shows and MLM conferences. I had recently come off tour with an artist famous enough to need a pretty large crew, but not famous enough to have a properly planned tour. The whole thing was an utter disaster. I don't know why they went. This person was not prepared to be traveling through the countries they were in. There were power outages, vandalism, theft, even some assaults. The scary kind, not like drunk people climbing shit and punching each other, which you get at even the best run shows. The expression, "the show must go on," is the mantra that everyone in this industry lives by, so I kept things running as best I could. But by the time we were at the end of the tour, we didn't really have any cool effects. It was all I could do to keep the lights on. When I got home, I was absolutely fed up with splicing wires together because some local vandal sliced up another one of my cables. I resolved my next few gigs were going to be corporate events and rich people's parties. Rich people can be difficult in their own way, and I don't love dealing with them. But there are significantly fewer stabbings or homeless people scalping copper when you're at a $500,000 wedding at someone's summer estate in Connecticut or whatever. Those events typically get planned more than a year out, so I wouldn't land many quickly. Conferences get planned well in advance too, but they always need substitute AV guys. The pay isn't good, but it is pay. But then someone approached me. I got a sort of cryptic email from a colleague introducing a client who had a job for me. The client wanted to meet in person at his house to discuss. I Googled the address, and it was in the rich part of town, the multi-million-dollar home part of town. I was hoping it was a wedding like I wanted, or maybe like a fancy renewal of vows. The guy sounded older on the phone, but it could be for his kids. I pulled up to his house at the appointed time. It was nice. It was old money nice, not garish at all. Perfect. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. An older gentleman answered the door. "You must be Mr. Duns," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm Eric Bukowski. We spoke on the phone." "Mark is fine, Mr. Bukowski," I said. "Sure thing. Come on in," he said, waving me into a very luxurious sitting room. "Can I offer you anything? Water? Iced tea?" "I'm good, thanks." "So, Mark," he said. He paused for a moment, fidgeting. We were seated facing each other over a coffee table that cost more than my van. I perked up. This was weird. Might not be a real job, but at least it was going to be an interesting conversation. Nobody looks this awkward when hiring a vendor for a party. An orgy. Was I getting invited to an orgy? "Your colleague, Mr. Martin, says you're the right person for the job. He said you're the man who can keep the lights on." "Well, sure," I said. I just came back from a tour where we barely had a power grid, but that's usually not the hard part of the gig. Is this event in a remote location? Power is not an issue. The building is connected to the grid, and I have them installing backup generators. He didn't say house. He said building. He bought or rented a whole building. A clue? I didn't know where this was going. Usually orgies were in people's houses, right? "Okay," I said, and I sat back. I've found that sometimes that's the best way to deal with people like this. Let them do the talking. If I peppered him with too many questions, he would likely get offended. I am, after all, only the help to a rich person. I'm not sure how to explain what is going to happen. There is, of course, the risk that you laugh in my face and walk out the door. There is also the risk that you laugh behind my back, take the money, and do not take the job seriously, which is unacceptable, as this is a matter of life and death. I had considered leaving you completely in the dark, if you'll pardon the choice of words, but a man deserves to choose his fate and not be led blindly. This was a weird talk, the weirdest talk I've ever gotten. As biased as I am towards the importance of my own profession, it's not life or death. It's never life or death. I've settled on a middle course, I think. The equinox will be in a few weeks. I own a property upstate. It's fairly large, and it's fairly remote. It is connected to the power grid, so you don't have to worry about that. There are battery banks and backup generators. It is, however, imperative that we keep the lights on for 1 hour. Excuse me, I said. Was this some kind of prank? Do you have a question? He seemed perplexed, as if this was not the part of the talk where he was expecting questions. An hour. Yes, 1 hour. At the time of the vernal equinox. Just the regular lights? There's no event? You don't need lighting design? There's no artistic design needed, no. White lights, floodlights. You may bring your own and set them up how you wish, in addition to what I'm having installed. They need to be kept on. For an hour. Is that an issue, Mark? I was already composing a scathing email in my head, back to Alvaro, the stupid, smug Spaniard. Thinks he's better than me? Thinks he's Leo fucking Villarreal? Sending me this childish assignment because he thinks I'm the right man for the job. No, of course not, I said. I was still going to take the money. Damn Alvaro. More the opposite. I do more complex stuff, and frankly, I'm wondering if you need me for this. If you just need to keep them on, maybe you need an electrician. I'm fairly expensive. I'm not, but I was thinking about what I could get away with. Double my usual fee? Triple. Don't concern yourself about the money, he said. We'll discuss full payment after it's done, but I will put you on retainer for $250,000 and advance you $25,000 of it today if you agree to take the job. This set alarm bells ringing. That was too much money, first of all, and the rest didn't make sense. A retainer? Discuss payment after the fact. I revised my email to Alvaro. It was going to read, "What the fuck," all caps, no punctuation. Hold on a minute, I said. I think I want to know what I'm getting into before I agree to this. And I will need to have my attorney look over anything that's not my standard contract before I sign. Eric smiled at me. Of course, if I may continue. I nodded. I need someone who is going to take this seriously. It will not be easy. I have reason to believe that this will in fact be very difficult. I had reached out to Alvaro Perez Martin because he worked on a commission for a friend of mine, and I later saw the installation he did at the embassy. Very technically challenging from what I'm given to understand. And this is going to be a challenging assignment. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. If ghosts were real, how would you defend against them? Ghosts. Like, are we talking Casper, or like the poltergeist? Imagine for a moment there is an entity. It's invisible. It's mostly incorporeal. It can pass through people and things. It can, for a brief, limited time, interact with objects, flip switches, knock over plates, that kind of thing. You can't catch it. Any box you put it in, it will glide right through. Well, I said, thinking deeply. I suppose at first glance it seems like you can't. I paused. But I paused again. No, I'm pretty sure you can't. Eric laughed. But you have to try, Mark. You have to try. Well, what do you propose? It's the simplest, but maybe the most costly option. You replace what it breaks. You keep replacing it, even if it keeps breaking it. Why? Because it's either that, or it becomes corporeal and wreaks havoc. I don't think I like where this is going. Let's say for a minute this entity needs darkness to appear. It reaches the height of its power during the equinox. If it happens during the day, it's out of luck. If it happens at night, well, moonlight will pose a problem for it. But if it's overcast, it will be ready and waiting. And remember, it can move things. Small things. What do you think it will do? The lights. Exactly so. So you want me to do what, exactly? It can reach through walls. I don't think we can stop it from turning them off. It has a very limited ability to physically interact with things. So we build a system with as few points of failure as possible, and we bring backups of our backups. No extraneous light switches in the building, for example. Auxiliary power. And you. This guy was a lunatic for sure. But there was something kind of flattering about being told, you have the kind of reputation where people thought you were able to successfully fight a ghost. Okay, I said. I'll do it. This is what I was afraid of, Eric said. You don't believe me? I'm a huge believer, I said. I grew up in a haunted house. Things moving the cupboards, weird noises at night. You couldn't take any photos inside because they would have the ghost in them. Scared my mom nearly to death. He shook his head. For someone in the theater business, you're a terrible actor. Ouch. What I want to know is, given the criteria I've laid out for you here, do you think this is something you are capable of? If you would rather refer me to someone else, I will gladly take your recommendations. He was shrewd, this guy. He had me figured out. I took the bait. I'm capable of it, I said. Of course, I'm capable of it. And that's how I found myself delivering a truckload of equipment to an old farmhouse in upstate New York. We had a week before the equinox by that point, which was child's play for a professional to set up. It was just a bunch of floodlights, minimal aiming, no controls. I have some basic indoor lights I use for events, but usually I'm at a venue which has its own setup, or I'm doing a wedding where they're commissioning custom light art chandeliers, or I am renting specialty stuff, so I don't have a lot of my own equipment. I begged some outdoor lights off a buddy who does architectural lighting. I'm more familiar with the lights used for outdoor shows. Theater lights. But they're not heavy-duty like the architectural stuff, which is designed to sit outside in the snow and rain for 15 years without breaking. If I destroyed them, I'd replace them. I had $250,000. Better safe than sorry. I didn't believe, but I wanted to show up looking like I did believe, and that I had prepared. There was a work crew there to help me set up. They had built a square ring of scaffolding around an otherwise totally innocuous patch of dirt in a mostly gutted barn. It seemed pretty sturdy. They helped hang up the lights, and they showed me the various outlets and junction boxes and where the breaker was. I took care of most of the fixture wiring myself. It was a ludicrous setup. It was way too many lights and a mishmash besides. The building had some industrial-looking lights hanging from chains and some wall packs mounted to the walls. Then you had pretty much every fixture I owned, which was kind of a lot when mounted together. They were spread along the horizontal bars about 6 feet up. I had debated putting them on the ground, but this would allow us to run across the center stage if necessary. Holding down the corners were 4 massive, overpowered, architectural floodlights. I mean, they're supposed to light an entire building from 100 feet away. Pretty sure you would have gotten a tan trying to sit in the center of them. It was rough to look at when they were all on, even from the outside, so I had the guys bring me some tarps, and I closed off the sides with them. Eric came down to see the install a couple days before. He nodded with an air of someone who had no idea what they were looking at. Which was fair. Even as a professional, it didn't look like anything except a bunch of lights. We had a strategy session that evening. He told me he would be staying in the farmhouse nearby. The work crew would be stationed around the property to tend to anything that needed it. He was very concerned about the power poles coming down. I thought you said this thing had a limited ability to move things, I said. It does. But if you find the correct weak spot, it doesn't take much to destroy something that seems sturdy. Have you ever seen videos of building demolitions? It takes shockingly few explosives to take down a high-rise. It's not going to take much to take down some termite-riddled poles. I wasn't sure who to bring, so I settled on Alan, my brother. And Steve, a guy I don't like that much, but is good at what he does. I wanted someone else who knew lighting there, just in case. And my brother, because he could do what he was told, and might as well make some money off this deal if anyone was going to. They drove up together the day of. My brother Alan practically leapt out of the pickup truck before Steve had even come to a complete stop. "That guy is a fucking lunatic," he said. "Ugh, yeah, just ignore all the political stuff," I said. "He didn't used to be so bad, but something happened last year. I don't know what. I don't want to hear about it for 3 hours, so I don't ask." "Well, we're just here for a few hours," Alan said. "And then it's $250. "Shut your mouth," I said, glancing at Steve. "How much is he getting?" $10,000. "I mean, it's not bad for a day's work," Alan said. "Yeah, but he's going to be pissed if he finds out I'm taking a 6-figure finder's fee. If he asks, I'm making $25 and you're making $5. Hey, why am I getting shortchanged?" "Because it's imaginary money. You don't know shit about lights. You're getting the actual money. Quit bitching." "Whatever." We had another meeting late afternoon with Eric, who impressed upon us the importance of maintaining the lights. He gave us each a walkie-talkie and told us which channels to use. We had hoped the weather might clear, but it was overcast all day. As the sun set, the rain started. We retreated into the barn. We had some space heaters and a folding table and chairs. I had my boxes of equipment, cables, quick connectors, spare parts, arranged at strategic intervals around the perimeter of what I was calling the stage out of habit. I turned the lights on and set an alarm on my phone. When it was closer to time, I was going to set a timer to ring every 10 minutes, so we knew how we were progressing through the hour. We played cards. Alan tried to make small talk, but got a little heated with Steve. I told them to both just shut up, so it was a pretty tense game of Go Fish. I was deeply relieved when my alarm went off just before 11 p.m. I did a final check of everything to make sure it was ready to go. 10 seconds, I said. "Everybody ready?" The clock ticked down, but nothing happened. We sat around for a few minutes, played another hand. My phone chirped at the 10-minute mark. "Easiest $10,000 I ever made in my life," Steve said. There was a pop as one of the lights blew. We all jumped and looked at each other. "A coincidence," Alan said. Then another. "You jinxed it, you fucking asshole," I said. "Everyone to a boom. I'll take the far wall. Alan, you take the closest, Steve, to his left." "Holy shit," Steve called as we ran. Was this fucker for real? It was my cheap lights going, one by one. They're LEDs, so you can see when the current is too high. The color starts to change right before they fail sometimes. I've been told it's something to do with the temperature of semiconductor. Alan, the only reasonable person in our group, had brought his sunglasses. Steve and I were squinting, peering through the tarps. "That one's blue," Alan said, pointing to one on my side. As I looked, it popped and started smoking. Something was overloading the electronics on board the fixture. A power surge would have affected all the lights, not just one. Steve grabbed a fire extinguisher and puffed it at the smoking light. "Alan, you see any of the other ones going?" "On Steve's side, looks like there's one." "Steve, kill the power." I had wired each bar on its own circuit so you could shut them off or turn them on individually. Steve and Alan were each manning one bar. I was manning two. I had fed the power to two sides from one boom, actually more by coincidence than design. Steve flipped the switch and shut his lights off. Alan's flicked off a millisecond after. "Alan, Your power! Get it on, I said. Steve flicked his lights back on as Alan fumbled. Sorry, I don't know what happened, Alan called. Got it. His came back on a moment later. We stood silently for a moment. Pandemonium erupted over the walkie-talkies. It sounded like 10 people started yelling at once, and then an ear-piercing noise that shut everyone up. Eric said into the silence, "We've switched to battery backups." One at a time. What's everyone's status? Lights. On, I said. We listened to the walkie-talkies, tense. It wasn't a pole that went. It was a dead tree. It had fallen onto a Jeep with one of the workers in it and hit a power line on the way down. The power was out. A few guys were pulling him out of the car, injured but alive, and a few more were working on getting the power back online, though it seemed to me like that would take longer than an hour. A couple more guys had been dispatched to the generators. There were 2 groups of 2, so 4 generators total. It was quiet for a few minutes. I thought that I didn't envy the guys outside, who were freezing their nuts off in plastic ponchos in the driving rain. My phone pinged. It had been 20 minutes. Then things started going wrong. It was like working a show from hell. Every little thing that could possibly go wrong did. The quick connectors slipped off somehow, unsplicing the wires. Connectors came loose. Fixtures burned out. Cables shorted. Alan was losing more fixtures than me or Steve, who had more of an intuitive sense about the fixtures, what needed to be done, and when we needed to kill the power. I made sure to never kill both of my bars at once, even if it meant losing a fixture. So far, we hadn't all had a fixture issue at the same time, but I didn't like the odds of me, Steve, and Alan turning them off all at once by mistake. I was the failsafe. It was happening too fast to really communicate. I was running from side to side, trying to diagnose and fix 10 fixtures at once. I regretted screwing all the lids on the weatherproof junction boxes. It had seemed safer, but I lost precious seconds getting one off to check why one of my bars went down. At one point, Alan asked me for more quick connectors, because he didn't know where I had packed them in his box. I grabbed a handful of the little plastic orange things. They looked kind of like Legos, and I flung them across the stage, scattering them. Alan grabbed one, and so did Steve. We worked in grim silence for a little while, and then my phone pinged. It had been 30 minutes. The wind was picking up. The barn wasn't the most weatherproof, so it came whistling through every crack. It occurred to me that maybe Eric should have spent more time reinforcing the structure. But he was right. It didn't seem like the thing, whatever it was, could do more than little things. It couldn't smash a whole fixture, but it could wiggle a wire, and apparently that was enough. I was fully on board with something causing the failures by this point. This many problems was not due to chance, and it wasn't due to shoddy workmanship on my part. With the wind came another problem, though. The roof. There was enough force to knock something loose up there. Or at least, enough force that a little push from our friend could tip things over the edge. Water came sluicing down from somewhere above, hitting the crossbeams overhead and running down the walls. The hanging lights went first, the water running down the chains and instantly shorting out the fixtures. The wall packs hung on a little longer, but they too failed quickly. I was surprised by those. I thought they were weatherproof. I lost one of my bars next. The whole bar. Probably 8 fixtures at that point, as I had been lucky keeping them functioning. Fuck, I screamed. The junction box covers, which had seemed like a good idea, and then a bad idea, now seemed like the best idea in the world. Some of the water dripping from the ceiling ran into the junction box I had opened. It was running line voltage. I didn't dare touch it. I kicked it with the rubber sole of my shoe out of the path of the dripping water. Someone has to go to the breaker, I shouted. I'll do it, Alan called back. I'm no good here anyway. Leave my lights on or off. Off, I said. Too much fucking water. Kill the power to number 2. On it, he yelled. His lights went off and I heard his voice over the walkie-talkie. This is Lights. Water's gotten into the building and I'm going to the circuit breaker. Can we get someone to fix the roof? Eric's voice crackled back. We're having some issues with the generator. I'll send someone as soon as I can. We switched to the Lights channel, and Alan let me know when he had switched the breaker. Number 2, I asked. Yep. You're sure? Yep. I don't want to get fried. I'm sure. I gingerly touched the waterlogged junction box. It didn't kill me. I dumped the water out. I didn't think it was safe to turn it back on, though. It worked, I said. Told you. Alan came back and turned his lights on after checking for water damage. The wind was howling, so it was hard to hear. I said to Alan and Steve over the walkie-talkie, "Problems with the generator? I don't like the sound of that." Steve said nervously, "Probably the rain. Hell of a night, huh? Hell of a night." My phone pinged. 40 minutes, I said. Almost at the finish line. I'm switching back to the main channel. I didn't like our dwindling numbers. Alan had 3 fixtures, Steve had 5, and I had 4. We had started with probably 40. The heavy-duty architectural floods, at least, were stalwart. They hadn't flickered once. I had wired them to their own circuit as well, mostly because they draw so much power, but I was happy for it now. The lights flickered. Only briefly, but there was a sound like rushing wind in the dark. Steve screamed. The lights came back on. "Steve, you okay?" I shouted. "I'm fine. Just spooked is all." "Everybody get your flashlights," I said. Before I could do as I said, the power went out. We stood in pitch blackness for a brief moment before Eric's voice came over the walkie-talkie, shrill and panicked. "Lights," he asked. "You there?" "We're here," I said. "We have flashlights." Alan had flicked his on. It was a dim glow, but you could make out shapes of things. "You have to keep light on the center area. Nothing else matters. Keep light in the center. The generators should be working momentarily." Alan had ripped down his tarp and aimed his beam at the center of the stage. I heard Eric firing off rapid questions about the generator. The guy on the other end was calm, but people were shouting in the background, so he was hard to hear. "Another 10 seconds, he said, which was all I caught as I turned to grab my flashlight from the box. Guys," Alan yelled. The room was pitch black. I turned, but I couldn't see anything. "The flashlight died," Alan said, completely unnecessarily. I turned back and felt for my box. I couldn't hear much over the sounds of the storm. I felt like I was deaf and blind. I started to panic. I swung my hand where I thought the box was, but missed, walked forward, hit it with my shin, and had to feel around. Quickly. I didn't have time for this. My heart was racing. "Guys," Alan screamed, "do you hear that?" Over the sound of the rain drumming on the roof and the wind howling, there was a rushing sound like wind, only much closer to us. There was also a low groaning, barely perceptible, and then a series of loud snaps and pops, before a crash. I couldn't find my flashlight. It was right at the top. I knew it was there, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't feel it. Everything felt alien and unrecognizable in the dark. Alan yelled, "Steve, what is it?" "Steve?" And my panic mounted. If we died, Mom would hunt me down and kill me a second time for dragging Alan into this. I don't know what I was thinking when I brought him along. He screamed. In frustration, I upended the box. Things came clattering out. I heard some stuff go rolling. And then the lights came back on, but dimly. I snatched the flashlight up and whipped around. "Oh my God," I said. It took me a second to process what I was looking at because it was completely different from only a minute before. twisted up metal like something gigantic had burst from the ground. The popping noise was the scaffolding giving way under pressure. It had buckled and snapped like it was nothing. Bits of glass and plastic were strewn across the ground between the fixtures. It was carnage. The lights were smashed. All of them. Some of them were still functioning, although I don't know how. 2 of the floodlights, though one was fading fast, and a couple of the smaller spots that had been on the bars. One was dangling from a cable and spinning slowly in a circle like the world's worst disco ball, the ruined scaffolding making thin, wavering shadows that danced around. Another was laying on the ground. I dodged through the twisted scaffold and charged across the space. I slipped and fell pretty hard. A piece of plastic skidded out from under my feet, and I went down. I smashed my phone on something. I didn't see Alan or Steve. I scrambled upright and ran to the other side. Alan was sitting on the ground, dazed. "Alan, thank God. What happened to Steve? Did something get him?" "I think he left," Alan said. "He ran. I heard him fall. He got back up and made for the door. I think he was crying." He pointed. The door was open and slamming against the wall in the wind. The rain was pooling on the floor. "I think it got me," he said. I looked down at his leg, and he had a nasty gash on his shin, maybe down to the bone. "Fuck, you have to get out of here," I said. "Mom will never forgive me if she finds out I got you into this. Get to the house. Eric probably has supplies there." I looked around for something to wrap it with. I grabbed the first aid kit Eric had left for us and pulled out the gauze. I wrapped it around his leg as tight as I could. The bandage bloomed red. It didn't seem sufficient, so I ripped off my shirt and wrapped it around as best I could. "I don't think it's that bad," Alan said. "I can't even feel it." "Go to the house," I said. I got him up and shoved him out the door. I think he was sort of in shock because he left me without an argument. I closed the door and latched it. "Lights," Eric's voice came over the walkie-talkie. "I copy," I said. "Still on? How's the situation?" "Not good, Eric. The lights are on now, but they went out and we couldn't keep anything on. Something smashed most of them before the generators kicked in." "How bad is it?" "I have 2 of the small spots, and 1, maybe 2 of the big floods. 2 flashlights. It's a mess in here. I sent Alan to you. He's injured." 15 more minutes, Eric said. I glanced at my phone. "Think you can hold out?" "Maybe," I said. "Do you need me to send someone?" I laughed. "If I can't keep these lights on, I don't think anyone else here can. Number, there's only a couple. I'll see if I can't patch them up. Keep the power on." "I will," Eric said. I killed the power to the fixture that was dangling first. It was just the cable that was fucked up, but I had brought spares. I patched it up and turned it back on, placing it gingerly on the ground. The other one had a cracked housing. It was running, but it probably wouldn't take much more to kill it. One of the floods was fine. The other had cracked glass, and I think some water had gotten into it. It was flickering intermittently, and was extremely dim. I didn't think it was going to last 15 minutes. I dug Steve's flashlight out of his box. He'd never even touched it. He had kept his lights going until we lost all power, though, so I had to give him credit for that. My phone beeped at me. 50 minutes. I sat down on the ground near the flickering light. I was tired. Bone deep. Tired. This had been the longest 50 minutes of my life. I wondered if it was over. The flickering light sputtered out and didn't come back on. I sat up. It might have been natural causes, or the thing might have been back and pushing buttons. I stood up. I wasn't sure what to do if we lost power again, or if all the lights failed. I had the 2 flashlights, which would buy me a few seconds each, but it seemed to be able to fuck with Alan's. I couldn't get it back on either. His was totally fried. I started to get a crazy idea. It was a bad idea, but I didn't want to find out what was there in the dark. It was better than nothing, and I didn't like the chatter coming over the walkie-talkie. "Eric, stand by," he said. I edged backwards towards the circuit breaker. The lights flickered. "Eric!" "Not now," he snapped. "Keep the line clear. We're trying to fix the generator, I know." The lights flickered again. Christ. The lights shut off. "Eric!" I screamed into the walkie-talkie. Everything felt like it was in slow motion. I dropped the walkie-talkie and glanced at my phone before pulling out the second flashlight, one in each hand. 57 minutes. The seconds ticked by. It would go for my flashlight when I turned it on, so I wanted to space it out as long as I could and buy myself as much time as possible in the hopes they could get the power back up. It was the worst 30 seconds of my life. I don't know if you've ever been in the complete pitch black, alone, in an unfamiliar open space, but it would not have been fun even if there was nothing there. I felt incredibly exposed. I backed up until I hit the metal door of the breaker panel. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to hear the thing in time to turn my light on. I strained my ears, trying to convince myself either that I did or didn't hear something. I didn't know which was worse. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I willed myself to be able to sense something, anything, in that void. My eyes kept scanning, unable to track anything in the dark. After an eternity of maybe 15 seconds or so, I heard a sound like wind rushing, though over the storm it was hard to tell. I tensed even more than I already was, something I didn't know was possible. I waited another couple of seconds before I flicked on the light. It didn't go all the way. I don't know how else to describe it. There wasn't anything in the center of the stage that I could see, but that's how far my light went before it just stopped. Something was eating the light. I stood there with the beam trained towards the center of the room, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, for a few seconds before it vanished. All of a sudden, my flashlight was hitting the far wall again. That scared me more. I had been trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or that there was just an object in the way, or something. But there wasn't. There had been something there. I stood there, numb, my flashlight in my shaking hands. The flashlight started making a weird ticking sound, and I can't describe how it made my skin crawl. The thing was like, in my flashlight, in my hand. Had it passed through me? I tossed it to the ground and it went out. I stood in the dark for a few more seconds before I thought I heard the wind again in the middle of the room. I hesitated on turning on the other flashlight, as it was the last one, but I heard a loud crunching sound. I flicked it on and screamed. Something was there, across the room. It had demolished the lights that were on the floor. It was thrashing in the light, undulating like a leech. It was less like a shadow now, and more like a form. It took longer to vanish this time, and less time to kill my flashlight. I was plunged into darkness again. Eric's voice chirped from the walkie-talkie almost as soon as the flashlight died. Power's back on. People were screaming in the background. I turned and slapped my hand along the circuit breakers, finding and flicking on circuit number 2. "Lights, you there? Mark, do you copy? There's 30 seconds left. Get the lights on, not much longer now." The junction box that had been full of water crackled to life. There was some arcing, tiny lighting bolts that seared my eyes. I looked away. One of the lights on that bar, that looked shattered beyond repair, flickered to life for a few seconds before burning out. It was a dull glow and short-lived, but it was light. And then the live wire, still arcing wildly, started an electrical fire. Everything was wet, so it was difficult to burn. But there was a tiny, small flame growing brighter by the second. The acrid smell of melting plastic stung my throat. I scooped the walkie-talkie off the floor. "There's light," I said, coughing. "Oh, thank God," Eric said. "The building is on fire." "Will it stay on fire for the next 10 seconds?" "I think so." We sat in awkward silence for 10 seconds. "It's safe now," Eric said. "Is it?" And that's how I ended up with $500,000. I guess that's what Eric meant by discuss payment after the fact. He asked what I thought was fair, and I said $250,000, not understanding what he meant and wanting to keep the full retainer, but he wired me an additional $250,000. Alan was fine. He got stitched up and his leg healed all right, although he's going to have a gnarly scar to show for it. I gave him $100,000. I would have given him all of it if he wanted, especially in exchange for never saying a word to our mother, but that was all he would take. Eric also paid his hospital bills as an apology, so he came out ahead. I gave Steve his $10,000. I don't think he deserved it, but he was threatening to sue me, and I didn't want the $500,000 thing coming out in court because he would really go ballistic then, and maybe even demand more. As for me, I took a salaried job with a manufacturer. Sales engineering. Boring, but completely safe. I used the money to top up my woefully underfunded retirement and put a down payment on a house. All boring stuff, but I felt like I had had enough excitement in my career and was ready to settle down. I found my first few gray hairs after that night. Getting a girlfriend is also a lot easier when you're only gone a few days at a time for work, and not a few months, and that's been going well. It's been a few years since then. I've been thinking about getting back into theater lighting, just a little. Maybe some college theater productions or something. I miss it. But honestly, being in a dark theater makes me uneasy. I don't know what happened on the equinox, and I don't care to. Eric contacted me again the next year, but I turned him down. I don't know who he got instead, but I assume it went fine without me, as the world hasn't ended. But it's possible that thing is out there somewhere, in the dark. I can't forget how it looked. My one quirk these days, which drives my girlfriend crazy, is that I always sleep with the light on.